The wind came low and lonesome through the canyon, carrying with it the scent of sagebrush and long-forgotten sorrow. It whispered to the stones, rustled the tall grass, and curled around the hooves of a weary horse making its way down a dirt trail almost claimed by time. The rider slouched in the saddle, eyes shadowed beneath a wide-brimmed hat that had seen too many suns. His name was Elias Hart, and he had no place to be, which was exactly why he kept riding. His horse, an old bay gelding named Bramble, moved slow but sure, like they were both measuring the weight of another day. The sky stretched out above them, endless and pale, and somewhere in the distance, the sun crept down toward the earth with the soft grace of a curtain falling. Elias hadn't spoken aloud since leaving the last town 3 days ago. Conversation felt like a coat that didn't fit anymore. He kept to his silences now, where no one asked him who he used to be. Once he had been a brother, a dreamer, a man who built things. Now he was just a name with a face carved by wind and grief, bones housed in flannel and dust. The world had taken what mattered, and he'd let it. There were things you didn't fight once they got too close. The land dipped and rose like breath beneath a blanket, and as he neared the edge of the next ridge, Elias reined Bramble to a stop. Down below, nestled in a crook of low hills, sat a forgotten town, 2 streets wide, half boarded up, buildings leaning like tired men. A sign dangled crookedly from rusted chains, Hollow Bend. The paint was flaking, but it still whispered welcome to the desperate. He wasn't planning on staying, only to water the horse and fill his canteen. But fate doesn't knock, it leaves the door open and waits. The general store was empty except for the soft squeak of floorboards and the creak of ceiling fans that no longer turned. Behind the counter, a faded ledger lay open beside a jar of peppermints turned white with age. Elias took a tin of beans and left 2 coins without a word. He didn't see the girl watching him from behind the curtain at the back. Elsewhere, beyond the edge of town, a woman moved like smoke through the trees. She was 7 months along, belly round beneath a patched dress, boots worn near to breaking. Her breath came hard. Each step was a decision. Her name was Clara, and she was running, not from a law, not from bandits or blood, but from something far more intimate. She had been loved poorly. That was the truth of it. Her husband had loved her like a man loves a trophy, not a soul. The day she told him she was carrying, he'd looked at her not with joy but disappointment, like she'd broken something inside him. He hadn't struck her, not at first. Just vanished for nights, came back with the scent of whiskey and shame. Then one night he did strike her, and something in Clara cracked, but not in the way he'd hoped. She fled the next morning, taking only a sack of bread and a stolen revolver. Her wedding ring she left on the nightstand. By the time Clara reached Hollow Bend, her breath was shallow, and the ache in her back felt like coals under her skin. Her horse had died 2 towns back, and her feet bled through her socks. Still, she moved, like a storm gathering behind quiet skies. The baby kicked, and she pressed her hand to her belly, murmuring something only the wind could hear. She collapsed sometime near dusk, halfway between the ridge and the empty barn beyond the town limits. The dust settled around her like a blanket. Elias was on his way out, saddle-packed and mind adrift, when he heard the crow caw 3 times from the south. It was a strange sound, sharp and wrong in the stillness. Bramble shifted nervously. Something in Elias stirred, a memory of another cry years ago, when his brother fell beneath falling timber. He'd ignored it then. He didn't now. He found her crumpled near a dry creek, curled like a comma in the sentence of the land. Her dress was torn at the hem, and her breathing came ragged, like a storm-battered window shutter. Elias dismounted and knelt beside her. She stirred as he touched her shoulder, but didn't wake. Her skin was hot, too hot, and her lips were cracked like riverbed clay. He didn't ask her name, didn't wonder how she got there. He just lifted her, slow and steady, one hand beneath her knees, the other at her back. Bramble watched with dark, patient eyes as they moved toward the only shelter nearby, a hunting shack left to time and ivy, not 10 minutes' walk from the road. The shack smelled of old cedar and forgotten smoke. Elias laid her on the cot, covered her with a horse blanket, then lit the old lamp and set a pot to boil over a fire he coaxed with dry bark and memory. He wet a cloth and pressed it gently to her forehead. He watched her breathe. Night fell in careful layers. Owls called from the trees, and somewhere far off, coyotes gave their solemn song. Inside, the silence was a living thing, but it did not feel empty. Clara stirred near midnight. Her eyes opened slow, as if unsure of the light. She blinked at the low flicker of fire, then saw him sitting in the chair beside her, hat in his lap, head bowed like in prayer. Her lips moved, barely sound. "You found me." He nodded. "I couldn't leave you," he said, his voice soft and deep, as though unused to leaving his mouth. She closed her eyes again, and something like relief passed over her face, fragile as mist. In the quiet that followed, Elias listened to her breathing, steady now, like the wind after rain. He didn't know her story, didn't know her name, but something in the way she had clung to life, even in collapse, spoke louder than words. She was not fragile. She was holding too much. The fire burned low, and still he sat by her side, listening to the sounds of sleep and unborn life. He did not plan on staying the night, but when the coyotes quieted and the stars blinked wide above, he knew without question. He wasn't leaving. And though the desert was still and the shack nothing more than wood and warmth, a shift had occurred. Small, unseen, but real. In the hush of that hour, with only the fire for witness, something old inside Elias stirred awake. Something that hadn't moved in years. Not love, not yet, but the beginning of a different kind of hunger. The kind that comes when a man, long lost to the world, realizes he's not quite alone anymore. And somewhere between his silence and her sleep, the story began. Morning filtered through the warped slats of the shack, like fingers of pale gold, touching dust motes that danced slowly in the hush. The fire had burned to embers. The pot hung empty above it. Elias stood over the stove, coaxing heat from the last of the kindling. Outside, a pair of crows squabbled in the cold. Behind him, Clara stirred. She moved slowly, uncertainly, the way one does waking from both dream and ache. Her eyes opened not with fear, but with a quiet caution, as though she expected to find herself alone again. But she wasn't. Elias turned when he heard the cot creak. "You're safe," he said. No greeting, no explanation, just those two words. She nodded, though her throat was tight. He offered her a tin cup of warm water. She took it with both hands, fingers trembling slightly, and drank. Her lips were cracked, but her eyes clear. "How long was I out?" "Half a night. Maybe a bit more." He knelt beside her, not close enough to crowd, just enough to see if she could sit upright. She did, slowly. Her hand drifted to her belly, protective, familiar. "I thought I could make it through," she said, almost to herself. "Didn't think the walk would break me." "It didn't," he replied. "You're here." The silence between them was thick, but not sharp. Not the kind that demanded talk. It let them breathe. She watched him as he moved about the shack, collecting firewood from the small stack, dousing the coals just enough to cool, not kill them. There was a gentleness to his rhythm. Not grace, not polish, but a kind of practiced quiet. The man had known solitude, but not bitterness. That made a difference. "I'm Clara," she said finally. He nodded. "Elias." Another pause. No handshake, no exchange of pleasantries. Just names passed like a shared flame. Later, they sat outside on the porch steps, a thin slice of sun stretching over the hills. Elias had opened a jar of pickled carrots and offered her half without asking. She chewed slowly, her stomach cautious. From that perch, the town lay small and still below, like a memory too stubborn to fade. Clara's eyes traced the buildings. "Hollow Bend," she murmured. "Didn't expect much, but it's even less." He nodded. "Most folks gone after the mine closed. What's left's just bones and quiet." She tilted her head. "Why are you here?" He didn't answer right away. He watched a hawk circle overhead before speaking. "Didn't mean to be. Was passing through. Then I heard you." She studied him. "You didn't have to stop." "No," he agreed, "I didn't." That was the end of it, for now. Over the next few days, a rhythm formed. Clara rested in the cot, ate what little Elias had to share, and ventured out for brief walks in the sun, one hand always resting gently on her belly. She didn't ask for help, but Elias gave it anyway, without fuss, without pity. He patched her boots with spare leather. He fetched herbs from the hills and boiled them into bitter tea that helped her sleep. Clara did not trust easily. Too many hands had held her only to squeeze. Too many eyes had looked without seeing. But Elias, he was something else. Not soft, not exactly gentle, but steady. Solid, like stone warmed by sun. He didn't probe, didn't try to fix her, just made space for her to be. She noticed the way he moved at dusk, how he stood still just to feel the wind, how he lit the lamp with care, always checking the wick twice. A man who lived with loss, she thought, becomes fluent in small rituals. One night, after a dinner of boiled beans and wild onion, she asked him where he came from. South, he said. Used to work timber. Had a brother. We built things. Homes mostly. What happened? He didn't answer right away. Then, one day the mine caved. He went in to get a trapped boy. Didn't come out. Clara looked down at her cup, steam rising like ghosts. I'm sorry. Elias shrugged. It was years ago. I left not long after. She didn't press. Some griefs don't like to be held. In return, she told him of the farm she left, of the man she married young. Her voice was flat as a desert plain. She described the loneliness of sharing a home with someone who saw her only in pieces, the body, the work, never the whole. He changed when I got pregnant, she said. Said he didn't want to raise a child in a world this broken. Then he broke me, like that'd fix it. Elias didn't move, didn't offer anger or comfort. He just sat beside her and listened. The fire cracked softly. In that moment, nothing else mattered. They began to speak more after that, not often, but with purpose. They talked about what they missed. Elias missed hammers and blueprints, the smell of fresh-cut pine. Clara missed music, her mother's humming while tending the garden, the creak of the porch swing at dusk. She laughed once, and it surprised them both. They did not speak of the future. On the fifth day, Elias carved a small wooden bird. It was rough, wings barely shaped, but when he handed it to Clara, she held it like something precious. She didn't ask why he'd made it. He didn't explain. That night, rain came soft and steady. The roof leaked in 2 places, but Elias had already laid out the pots. Clara watched him move, wet hair clinging to his brow, sleeves rolled high. The storm gathered, louder now, thunder grumbling like an old dog. Clara tensed on the cot, eyes flicking to the dark corners of the shack. The sound of storms had always left her cold. Her husband had shouted during storms, his anger mimicking the sky. Elias saw the change in her, the stiffened shoulders, the breath that caught. He moved to the floor, beside her, back to the wall, not touching. Just there. You're safe, he said again, voice low as the rain. She nodded, eyes closing, lashes wet. Then, without looking, she whispered, I believe you. Outside, the wind peeled across the fields. Inside, it was still. The next morning, she woke early. Elias was already outside, splitting wood in the gray dawn. She wrapped the shawl around her shoulders and stepped onto the porch. He glanced up and gave a nod. She watched him a long moment. I want to help, she said. He paused. You don't need to. I know, but I want to. So he showed her how to sort kindling, how to find dry bark even after rain. Her hands were clumsy but determined. She didn't speak much that day, but her eyes shone clearer. In town, old Mr. Whittle at the general store saw Elias come in for flour and smiled behind his beard. You look better, the old man said. Like you remembered your name. Elias didn't reply, but he didn't deny it either. When he returned to the shack, Clara was outside humming. Just a low sound, barely a tune, but it carried. He watched her from a distance for a moment, then walked over, setting the sack down with care. She smiled, not wide, not bright, but real. That night, they shared the last of the winter apples he'd found behind the store. Sweet and soft, nearly spoiled, but somehow perfect. The air between them was fuller now, not thick with tension, but with something slow-growing and quiet. Not romance. Not yet. But understanding. A steady braid of shared silence and wordless care. Later, when she lay down to rest, she watched him sitting near the fire, carving another shape. "Why do you help me?" she asked softly, barely more than breath. Elias didn't look up. "Because someone once helped me. When I didn't deserve it. Felt like I owed it forward. But now," he paused. "Now I think it's something else." "What?" "I don't want to leave." She didn't respond, but the way her breath hitched said more than words. And as the fire dimmed and shadows stretched long, Clara closed her eyes with a calm she hadn't felt in years. Safe, yes, but more than that. Seen. Wanted not in pieces, but whole. And outside the shack between them, the wind curled around the walls and whispered that something was coming, something neither of them yet had a name for. The meadow beyond Hollow Bend woke first in spring. Before the town stirred, before birds found their voice again, wildflowers pushed through thawed earth, blue flax, prairie smoke, sun-yellow balsam root. The land bloomed slow but certain, just as everything good seemed to. Clara sat beneath a cottonwood on the hill, knees drawn up, one hand lazily tracing circles across the slope of her belly. Her dress, faded and mended, fluttered against her ankles. She pressed wild violets between pages of a broken Bible she'd found beneath the floorboards of the shack. It smelled of age and candle smoke, and somewhere deep inside, a page had been marked by someone long gone. She didn't read the words. She just liked the feeling of it, something once precious, now quiet and hidden. Below her, Elias worked with a small axe, cutting boards from salvage planks. He was building something, though he hadn't said what. She didn't need to ask. She watched his shoulders move beneath the thin linen shirt, sweat darkening the back, sawdust on his arms like gold freckles. There was a rhythm to him now, like his body had found a purpose again and was grateful for the reminder. The days passed with little ceremony but deep meaning. They didn't speak of leaving. That conversation hung between them like mist, never quite clearing, never needing to settle. Instead, they spoke of small things, how to find clean water, where to plant rosemary, which stars told which stories. Clara found herself laughing more. Sometimes it startled her, how easy the sound escaped now, light as a leaf on wind. She began to sing, soft and tuneless, while tending to the herbs Elias planted by the back wall. He listened from inside, always with a kind of still reverence, like her voice might vanish if he moved too quickly. It was a slow, honeyed closeness they built. Never declared, never rushed. Just steady gestures, laid down like planks in a bridge neither dared name. One morning, Clara stepped out and found something resting on the porch rail. A cradle. Small, imperfect, carved with care. The legs were uneven. The joints were visible. But it held. And on its side, a little sunburst had been etched, a symbol that meant nothing but caught the light just right. She ran her fingers over the wood, then turned to Elias, who stood not far off, pretending to check the garden rows. "Did you make this?" His voice came gentle. "Couldn't quite remember how, but I think it'll hold." She looked at it again, blinked quickly, then nodded. "It's perfect." She didn't say, "Thank you." She didn't need to. Later that day, they walked through the meadow. Clara insisted she could go farther now, that her feet no longer ached like they used to. She moved slower than before, one hand pressed beneath her stomach, but her steps had steadiness. The wind tugged at her braid, and the sun scattered freckles across her cheeks. Elias stopped to pick a stalk of Indian paintbrush. He handed it to her, wordless. "You always this quiet?" she asked, teasing. "Only when I don't want to ruin the moment." She smiled, tucking the flower behind her ear. They sat down on a patch of earth dappled in shadow and wild scent. She spoke first, surprising herself. "I used to think I didn't deserve anything gentle." Elias looked over. "Why?" She shrugged. "Because the first man who loved me didn't love me kind. And I thought maybe that was the only kind there was." Elias didn't rush to reply. The breeze moved between them like a breath. "Not everyone's meant to walk hard roads," he said. "But some do, and they learn to spot every kindness like it's a flame in the dark." She turned her head slowly, met his gaze. His eyes were earth-brown and patient. There was no hunger there, no pity either, just presence. "You see me," she whispered. Not the belly. Not the bruises that used to be. Just me. He nodded barely. That's all I've ever seen. She closed her eyes for a moment, not because she was tired, but because it felt safer to feel with her eyes shut. A hawk cried in the distance. Time passed in slow motion. Later, back at the shack, she watched him from the window. He was stacking firewood, sleeves rolled, hair damp with effort. Her breath caught. Not because he looked like a hero in a dime novel, but because he didn't. He looked like a man who showed up. Again and again. And that, she was learning, was rarer than most things. As twilight fell, a shadow approached from the east road, just a flicker at first, then clearer. A rider. Clara's spine stiffened. Elias turned at the sound of hooves. He narrowed his eyes, jaw tightening subtly. The horse was black, the man on it cloaked in travel dust, his hat low. He didn't ride like a neighbor. Clara stepped onto the porch. "Do you know him?" Elias asked, stepping closer. "No," she said softly, but her voice cracked. The rider stopped a few feet off, dismounted. He pulled a folded paper from his saddlebag. A wanted poster. Tacked in crude print beneath her name, Clara Whitlock. Description rough, but enough to know. Elias's voice stayed even. "What do you want?" "I've got a job," the man replied. "Bounty for the girl. Her husband wants her back. She took what wasn't hers." "I took my life," Clara said, stepping forward. "And it wasn't his to keep." The man tilted his head, amused. "Don't matter what she took. Law says she goes back." Elias didn't raise his voice. Not without a fight. The bounty hunter looked him over. "You her keeper?" "I'm her choice," Elias said. A silence bloomed sharp. The man sneered, spit to the side, then mounted again. "Ain't worth it today. But I'll be back." Dust rose behind his horse like a ghost fleeing the grave. Clara's breath shook. Elias stood beside her, not touching, just close enough to steady. "You knew this might happen," she said. "I did." "You're not afraid?" He looked at her, not with bravado, but truth. "I am. But not enough to let them take you." She turned, eyes damp but not broken. Her hand found his sleeve, fingers curling just enough to say stay. Inside the shack, the fire still burned low. Outside, the meadow swayed in soft defiance. And in that flicker of night, where danger had brushed past and not taken root, something else deepened between them. Not urgency, not lust, but bond. Quiet and resolute. Like a vow carved not in words, but in the way they stood together, unmoving, unwounded. Neither said what they were feeling, but they didn't need to, because even among wildflowers and whispers, sometimes the heart shouts, and sometimes the right soul hears it. The storm came not with thunder, but with hooves. It had rained the night before, soft and cool, leaving the morning soil fragrant and dark. Mist clung to the low valley like breath held too long. But now the mist was gone, burned away by a rising sun and the tension in the air, sharp as drawn steel. Elias stood in the doorway of the shack, axe in hand but limp at his side. He'd sensed it before he saw it. The way animals grow silent, the way the wind changes its mind. Trouble doesn't always roar, it whispers first. Clara was inside, sitting at the edge of the bed, lacing her boots. Her belly had grown heavy, and each movement required thought, but her eyes were steady. "He's coming," Elias said. She didn't flinch. "I know." He turned to look at her, the lines in his face deepening with worry and something else, something like awe. She hadn't asked for him to protect her. She'd never once begged or pleaded. She'd simply stayed, and somehow that had become the bravest thing he'd ever seen. "I'll talk to him," he offered. "No. We stand together." There wasn't time to say more. Dust rose on the eastern trail. One rider, then two, then a third. And behind them, the man Clara once called husband, Reed Whitlock, rode with a smirk like smoke and eyes like blackened glass. He dismounted before the others, kicked the dry earth, and spat like he owned the world. "Clara," he called, voice too familiar, too wrong. "You made it hard to find you." She stepped from the shack, hair pinned back, chin high. "You weren't supposed to." Reed chuckled, turned to his men. "Listen to that. Mouth like a preacher now. All this wilderness turn you holy, sweetheart." Elias stepped beside her, quiet but firm, the axe now resting across both palms. "She ain't going with you," he said, each word shaped slow and deliberate. Reed's eyes flicked to Elias. "You her new savior? I paid for her train, for her clothes, fed her. That baby's mine." Clara's voice cut the air. "That baby's no one's but mine. You never wanted her. You only wanted to own something soft." Reed's face shifted, a flash of the man beneath the charm. He stepped forward, but Elias blocked him without lifting the axe. "You don't belong here," Elias said. The two other riders looked uncertain now. One glanced at the shack, then at Clara, then at Reed. It was clear this wasn't what they'd signed up for. "You think you're going to raise a bastard in the woods?" Reed sneered. "With a ghost like this?" Elias didn't speak. Instead, he turned slightly toward Clara, just enough for his voice to be heard only by her. "You want me to end this?" Her answer came not in words, but in the calm way she nodded. He faced Reed again. "She's not leaving with you. So ride out. Or stay and see what kind of man I really am." Reed laughed, but it broke halfway through. "You going to kill me, woodsman? I'm going to keep her safe, whatever that costs." The wind picked up, swirling between them. Reed reached for his belt, but the sound of a rifle clicking stopped him. Mr. Whittle stood a few yards off, his old Winchester shaking slightly in his grip, but pointed true. "Enough of that," the storekeeper called. "No law here but what we make, and this woman's earned peace." A few more emerged, Sarah's father, silent and big-shouldered. Annie from the well house, with her apron still on. Not many. Just enough. Reed looked around and realized the story had changed. He wasn't the center of it anymore. He spit one last time, turned to his men. "You coming?" Only one followed. The other stayed back, eyes low, as if suddenly ashamed of who he'd ridden with. Reed mounted in a flurry, but he didn't ride away quiet. As he turned his horse, he snarled toward Clara. "You think this is over? You'll bleed like every woman does. And when you do, don't come crying for help." Clara didn't respond. Her silence was her sword. The men rode out, dust trailing behind them like a memory being exhaled. Elias let out a long breath, lowered the axe, then looked at Clara. "You all right?" Her hand was on her stomach. "I think it's time." He blinked. "Now." She nodded once, steady but pale. "She's coming." What followed was a storm of a different kind. Hours stretched and blurred. The shack became a sanctuary, then a battlefield, then something softer again. Clara's voice broke against the walls, low and strained and wild with pain. Elias never left her side, not once. He brought water, changed cloths, pressed her hair back from her brow with fingers that shook harder than he'd admit. "She stuck," Clara whispered, gasping, soaked in sweat and fire. "You can do this," he said, his voice rough. "You've already come farther than anyone I know." When the cry finally came, it split the room like a hymn. A girl, small and red and loud with life. Clara held her first, arms trembling. Her eyes closed, and for a long moment she just breathed, the way you do after drowning. Then she opened them and looked to Elias. "She's here," she said, like it was the simplest truth in the world. He took the child in his arms, awkward and reverent. "Hope," Clara said softly. "That's her name." He nodded, the name sinking into him like spring rain. Night settled gently. The fire flickered low, casting a warm halo over the cradle. Now filled, now real. Outside, the town was quiet again. No riders on the ridge. No echoes of boots or shouting. Just wind and wood and newborn sleep. Clara sat propped against the cot, eyelids heavy but calm. Elias sat beside her on the floor, Hope asleep in his arms. He looked at her, the woman who had walked through hell and dared to sing again. "You changed me," he said, voice thick, without ever asking for anything. She reached for his hand, and their fingers intertwined without fanfare. "I didn't want to be saved," she whispered. "I just wanted to be seen." "You were," he answered, "long before I knew what I was looking at." They stayed like that, tethered not by ceremony, but by the quiet triumph of survival, of having chosen one another not because they were whole, but because they were willing. And out beyond the window, the wildflowers nodded in the dark, kissed by wind and stars. Because even after the storm breaks, if love has been real and rooted deep, the light always remains.